My mom gave her inheritance to my neighbor's daughter, saying, "She's like the daughter I wish I had." 6 months later, I was featured on a Netflix documentary, and she asked me to pretend we're close. I was born and raised in Sandusky, Ohio. We were a middle-class family with a narrow white house that looked just like all the others on the block. My mom, Lorraine, was a proper woman. Always neat. Always presentable. But there was a coldness about her that was hard to put into words. She wasn't cruel in the way you'd see in movies, she didn't scream or slap, but there was this heavy, constant disapproval that lingered in everything she did. She'd glance at my crooked ponytail and wordlessly fix it, too hard. She never hung my drawings on the fridge. When I brought home a B+, she'd remind me other kids were getting A's. I was an only child, so there wasn't anyone to compare myself to. At least, not until Hallie moved in next door. Hallie was bright and golden and loud in the way that makes adults smile. I was maybe 11 when her family moved into the pale greenhouse beside ours. Hallie was around 4 then, blonde pigtails, big blue eyes, always in little frilly dresses. From day one, she was it for Lorraine. Lorraine babysat her sometimes when the Mendozas were out working late. I remember coming home from school and hearing them laughing from the kitchen, actual, full-bellied laughter. My mom never laughed like that with me. It was always, "Use your inside voice," or "That's not ladylike, Callista." One day I overheard her talking to a neighbor during one of those endless driveway conversations people in small towns have. She said, "Hallie is just a joy. She's like the daughter I wish I had." She said it like it was nothing. I stood there with my school backpack still on, sweaty from gym class, and something in me cracked that day. Not all at once, but enough for the fracture to grow over the years. I left home at 18 and didn't look back much. I went to Cleveland State and studied journalism. Paid for it with scholarships, freelance editing, late-night coffee shop shifts. Lorraine and I barely spoke. If I called, she asked surface-level questions. If she called, it was to tell me how Hallie was doing, her dance recital, her GPA, how she made captain of the cheer team. I never asked. She told me anyway. I graduated, started writing for local publications. My beat was always off the beaten path, stories no one else wanted to touch. Cold cases. Government cover-ups. Missing people. It was thankless work for a long time. I slept on friends' couches, maxed out a credit card. Still, Lorraine barely noticed. Then I broke a story that changed everything. I uncovered the truth behind a missing persons case from 1982, an old Detroit cold case involving a teenage girl whose body was never found. My reporting got the attention of a documentary crew working with Netflix. They reached out, wanted to use my research for a new show they were developing. That show became Whispers of the Lake. When it premiered, everything changed overnight. My inbox exploded. I did interviews. Podcasts. Book offers started floating in. It was surreal. And in the middle of it all, Lorraine called. At first, I thought maybe, she was going to tell me she was proud. Instead, she said, "The Sandusky Register wants to do a piece about you." I was thinking, maybe you could come home. We could take a photo together. By the garden. It'd look nice. I paused. Then I said, "Is this before or after you gave Hallie your inheritance?" Silence. I could hear the breath hitch in her throat. She didn't deny it. Didn't even ask how I knew. She just said, "You don't need it." That's when I knew. She really didn't see anything wrong with it. See, a few months before all this, I got a call from Mr. Klein, our family attorney. Routine stuff, or so I thought. Until he mentioned the will had been updated. Lorraine left the house, her savings, stocks, everything, to Hallie. To me? A vintage sewing machine and a box of memories. Her words, not mine. A few weeks later, I went home. I didn't tell her I was coming. I just got in my car one Friday afternoon, drove down I-90, and showed up at her door. She opened it like she always did, practically emotionless. The same pale pink lipstick, the same pearl earrings. "I need to ask you something," I said. She stepped aside to let me in. Hallie was already there. She was curled up on the couch, drinking chamomile tea, wearing a matching loungewear set like she was in her own house. Honestly, by that point, maybe it was. "Did you ever think about how that would feel?" I asked Lorraine, standing in the middle of her living room, the air heavy with silence. "You've built a life for yourself, Callista," she said eventually. "You're successful. You don't need anything from me." "That's not the point," I said. "You've given her everything. All I ever wanted was some kind of acknowledgement." She didn't apologize. Not once. Just stood there, rigid as always. Hallie offered to leave the room. I didn't tell her to stay. "I spent my whole life thinking if I just worked harder, achieved more, maybe you'd see me," I said. "But now I know you were never even looking." I left after that. Didn't stay for dinner. Didn't return her calls. She tried to reach out again after my name showed up in a few more articles, small-time magazines wanting to do profiles. She even sent me an email asking if I'd reconsider the family photo idea. I never responded. A couple of weeks passed after I ignored her email, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then the packages started showing up. The first one was a padded envelope. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, her stiff, perfectly aligned cursive. Inside, there was a photograph. A printed photo, not digital. It was of me, maybe age 8, standing awkwardly in front of a science fair project with my name written in glitter glue across the top. Taped to the back was a note, "You always were brilliant." I should have said it then. I'm saying it now. I didn't know what to do with that. The next package came a week later. A small box. Inside, a handkerchief I remembered from childhood, white with a little stitched butterfly in the corner. She used to keep it in her purse, and once when I was sick at school, she gave it to me to wipe my nose. I hadn't seen it in over 2 decades. And then a third package, larger than the others. This one held a stack of my old notebooks, things I'd assumed were thrown out years ago. Poems I wrote in middle school, stories I scribbled on the backs of math homework. On the inside cover of one of the notebooks was another note, written directly on the page: "You were never invisible to me, Callie. I just didn't know how to be a mother to someone like you, someone who didn't need me in the way I understood. That's on me." I remember sitting there in my apartment in Lakewood, the box on the floor in front of me, and just staring at that note for a long time. Not crying. Not angry. Just tired. Because how do you even begin to process that kind of regret when it shows up decades late and wrapped in bubble wrap? I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I poured everything into work. The successive whispers of the lake had opened so many doors, and I was in the early stages of developing a follow-up series, this time about women who were left out of their own family narratives. Forgotten daughters. Girls were raised to believe they had to earn their place in the family tree. The working title? Invisible Daughters. The pitch was strong. Personal. Authentic. And I knew I had to include my story in it. Not because I wanted to air dirty laundry, but because I realized how common this is. How many women quietly carry that ache, believing they weren't good enough for the people who were supposed to love them most. I spoke with other women, through interviews, forums, DMs. Some had moms who praised their brothers while barely acknowledging their accomplishments. Others had been raised by grandmothers who only loved conditionally, through obedience. Some had been told outright that they were unwanted, or mistakes, or burdens. And it all sounded too familiar. I was building something that mattered. Something honest. And Lorraine? She was still sending emails. Each one softer. Shorter. More careful with her words. One morning, I opened one that simply said, "I don't expect a response. I just want you to know I think about you every day. I'm proud of the woman you are." That line was different. I saved it in a folder labeled Unsent Letters. I wasn't ready to forgive her. But I also wasn't ready to pretend she never existed. It was a weird space to be in, between anger and acceptance. A few weeks after that, I ran into Mrs. Mendoza at a gas station just outside Sandusky. I barely recognized her at first. Time had silvered her hair, softened her eyes. She greeted me with genuine warmth. "Callie, my God. Look at you." We chatted for a few minutes, making the kind of small talk people make when they haven't seen each other in over a decade. Eventually, though, her expression shifted. "She's not doing well," she said, nodding vaguely toward the east side of town. "Your mother, I mean. Lorraine's been in and out of the hospital. She doesn't talk about it much. You know how she is." I didn't respond. I didn't have words ready. "She asks about you. Every time I see her." I thanked her and left without saying anything else. But it followed me home like fog on my clothes. That night, I stared at my phone for almost an hour, debating whether to call. Not to make peace. Not to patch things up. But maybe. Just to see. In the end, I didn't. Instead, I opened a fresh document and started writing a new episode script. This one wasn't about a case. It was about a woman named Lorraine, and her daughter who always came second, even when she tried her best not to. I didn't name names. But the story was mine. Production began a few months later. The first episode aired quietly, on a smaller platform, nothing like the explosion of the Netflix series, but the response was deeper. Women wrote in. So many of them. Stories poured into my inbox, and with each one, I felt a strange sort of comfort. Like maybe none of us had been as alone as we thought. Around that time, Hallie emailed me. Yes, Hallie. I hadn't heard from her since that night in the living room when she quietly left the room to avoid conflict. The message was short. "Hey Callie. I watched your new docuseries. I didn't realize. I know things are complicated between you and Lorraine, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I never meant to take anything from you. I was just a kid." I sat with that email for a long time too. Because she wasn't wrong. She was just a kid. But she also became an adult who benefited from a dynamic that should have never existed in the first place. And I was supposed to just accept that? I wasn't ready to reply. But I didn't delete it either. Instead, I closed the laptop, turned off the lights in my apartment, and let myself feel everything. Not just the pain, but the strange relief of being seen, even if it came years too late and through the words of strangers who somehow knew exactly what I'd been through. It's funny, isn't it? How the people who are supposed to know you best often understand you the least. And yet, there's always this voice in the back of your head saying maybe, just maybe, they'll finally get it. Even when they've had a lifetime not to. It was sometime in early December when I got another call from Mr. Klein. He rarely called without an appointment, always the kind to send an email first, give warning. But this time, it was a direct call. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, unsure if I even wanted to hear whatever news he had. "Callista," he said, his voice calm, practiced. "Your mother's condition has worsened. Stage 4. They're not expecting much time left." I didn't say anything. "She's in hospice now," he continued. "Just outside town. Lakeside Community Home, near the old Lutheran church." I thanked him. Didn't promise I'd go. Didn't ask any questions. But the silence that followed me around the apartment that night was so loud, it started to scrape at the walls. I kept replaying the last time I saw her in person. The tight jaw. The vacant look. That carefully pressed blouse like she was dressing for a job interview, not a conversation with her daughter. All I could think was how even when she hurt me, she did it with composure. I told myself I wasn't going. What was the point? But 2 days later, I found myself on Route 2, just like I had so many times growing up, watching the bare Ohio trees blur past my windows, winter settling in like a second skin. The hospice was quiet. Smelled of warm broth and hand sanitizer. A nurse with kind eyes guided me down a hallway that felt too long, every footstep heavy and reluctant. Room 114. She looked smaller than I remembered. Frail. Tucked beneath a white blanket, face sunken in a way that startled me. Her hair was thinner, color faded to an almost translucent gray. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before stepping inside. Her eyes were closed. I didn't say anything. Just sat in the chair beside her and listened to the rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine. For a while, it felt like I was just a visitor in a room filled with time someone else had already used up. Then she opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but then she blinked and found me. She didn't cry. Neither did I. "Callista," she rasped. Her voice sounded like sandpaper. I nodded. "Hi." There was a long silence between us, years of it, really. "I didn't think you'd come," she said eventually. "I almost didn't." She looked down at her hands, now lined with veins and age spots. "I've made so many mistakes," she whispered. I didn't agree or argue. Just let her speak. I thought. If I praised her, I could fix what I broke with you. I didn't know how to reach you, and she was just easy. She adored me. I looked at her. That's not love. That's a performance. She gave a dry, weary smile. You're probably right. I don't know what I expected at that moment. Maybe a confession. Maybe even a breakdown. But she just closed her eyes again, like saying it took the last of her energy. I stayed another 30 minutes, saying little. When I stood to leave, she opened her eyes one more time. I kept everything, she said softly. Every article. Every interview. The Netflix show, I made the nurse replay it. Over and over. Her words didn't fix anything. But they filled a space in me that had been hollow for a long time. I nodded. Goodbye, Mom. She didn't try to stop me. I walked out and didn't look back. That winter, I threw myself into work like it was the only solid ground left. Invisible Daughters was slowly gaining traction. The network was small, but they believed in it. Episode 3 aired the same week a radio interview I did went viral on TikTok, unexpectedly. Suddenly, people were sharing clips, tagging friends, saying, "This was me too," or "This reminds me of my mother." The commonality of it was what hit me hardest. The grief of not having what you should have had. The grief of being raised in a house where your presence was tolerated, not celebrated. I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, with a Sandusky return address. For a split second, I thought it might be from Lorraine. But it was from Hallie. The handwriting was neat, slanted to the right, unfamiliar. She had taken her time. It wasn't a text, not a quick apology. It was deliberate. Pen on paper. That mattered. Kelly, I don't know if you'll read this. I know I don't deserve much space in your story, and I won't pretend I understand everything. But I want you to know, I never tried to replace you. I was a child, and I thought your mother's attention meant something simple and sweet. I didn't know what it meant for you. But I do now. I've seen what it costs you. I'm not reaching out to make it about me. I just want you to know I'm sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. No pressure. Just the truth. Hallie, that night, I read her letter 3 times. I still didn't know what to feel. I didn't hate her. I never truly did. It wasn't her fault how Lorraine positioned her in my life. But she had benefited from it, knowingly or not. Still, something about her letter was different. Not just in tone, but in ownership. And that meant something. I folded it carefully and tucked it inside the same folder as Lorraine's last note, the one about not knowing how to love me. That folder was getting thick. And for the first time, it didn't make me feel heavy. It made me feel like I'd survived something. By late January, the hospice called. Not Mr. Klein this time. Just a nurse. Lorraine had passed in her sleep the night before. I didn't cry. I didn't drive down. But I did open a blank document on my laptop and begin typing again. A new story. One I didn't think I'd ever tell in full, but now it felt necessary. The funeral came and went without much noise. I didn't go. Mr. Klein handled everything, and I think even he knew not to push. He sent a short email afterward, a scanned copy of the obituary, a note that the estate had officially passed to Hallie as dictated in the will, and a final sentence that read, "If you'd like any personal items from the house, you should arrange to collect them soon." I stared at that line for a long time. Personal items. There weren't many of those. Still, a week later, I found myself on my old street again. That narrow slice of Sandusky suburbia hadn't changed much, same cracked sidewalks, same leaning mailboxes. But the house. Lorraine's house. It looked different. Hallie had repainted the shutters. Lavender now, instead of deep navy. There were flower pots out front. Solar lights in the walkway. It looked softer. Warmer. She answered the door before I could knock. She didn't smile, but she didn't look surprised to see me, either. Just nodded slightly and stepped aside to let me in. I followed without a word. Inside, the changes were subtle. The couch was reupholstered, a different rug under the coffee table. But it still smelled like lavender and old books. The air held that same hush it always had. "I didn't change much," she said, almost apologetically. I shrugged. "It's yours now." She looked like she didn't know how to respond to that, so we stood in silence for a beat longer than was comfortable. "I left some boxes in your old room," she said finally. "Stuff I figured you'd want." I went upstairs alone. My room had become a half-storage space. The furniture was still there, but everything had a thin layer of dust. It felt like a museum exhibit of someone I barely remembered being. There were 4 cardboard boxes stacked near the closet. Each labeled with my name. I opened them one by one. High school yearbooks. A varsity jacket I never wore. A box of old mix CDs I made in college, titles scribbled in Sharpie, Late Night Drives, Angry Girl Vibes, Study Until You Cry. I smiled at that last one. There was a folder with my early writing, clippings from my high school paper, old short stories I'd submitted to teen writing contests. All yellowed at the edges. I couldn't believe she'd kept them. The last box was the smallest. Inside was the sewing machine, the one thing I remembered her using when I was a kid. It still smelled like oil and metal. I hadn't touched it since I was 14. On top of it sat a small wooden jewelry box. One I didn't recognize. When I opened it, there was a single photograph. Faded, but familiar. It was me, around 12, standing in front of the house, holding a trophy from a spelling bee I barely remembered winning. Lorraine was behind me, one hand on my shoulder, caught mid-laugh. The only photo I had ever seen where she looked genuinely proud of me. I didn't remember it being taken. I didn't remember her being there. But there it was. Beneath it, folded neatly, was a letter. "Callista, if you're reading this, then I've passed, and you've come home in some way. I don't deserve that. But I hoped for it. I spent most of your life mistaking strength for distance. I thought your independence meant you didn't need me, and I let that excuse become my comfort. But the truth is, I was intimidated by you. You were bold. Curious. Always chasing something more. And I didn't know how to be a mother to that kind of girl. That's not your fault. That was my fear. And I regret every moment I made you feel small because I didn't know how to feel big enough for you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know. I saw you. I always saw you. I just didn't know how to say it at the moment. I hope someday you write about this. You always had a gift for telling hard truths with grace. Even if the truth is that I failed you. Love, Lorraine." I sat on the edge of the old bed for a long time, the letter in my hands, the late afternoon light bleeding through the dusty blinds. I didn't cry. I just sat with it. Let it settle in my bones. The grief wasn't clean. It wasn't the kind that comes all at once and then lets go. It was messy. Uneven. Some days I hated her. Other days, I missed a version of her that never really existed. And in between all of that was this strange, unfamiliar empathy that I didn't know what to do with. Hallie didn't come upstairs. She gave me space, and I appreciated that. When I finally came down with the boxes, she was in the kitchen, making tea. She poured 2 cups without asking. We sat at the small table in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. She finally said, "She kept everything of yours." More than I realized. I nodded. I guess she didn't show it. She was complicated. That was generous. But I let it hang in the air between us anyway. After a while, Hallie cleared her throat. I didn't ask for any of this. The house. The money. I didn't even know she'd updated her will until Mr. Klein called. "I know," I said. And I meant it. I offered to give some of it back. Or donate it. I didn't know what was right. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "It is what it is. But it doesn't feel fair." I looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't that little girl in pigtails anymore. She was a woman. Flawed. Trying. "Fair ended a long time ago," I said quietly. We didn't say much after that. I took the boxes and left without any awkward goodbyes. Back in Lakewood, I unpacked everything slowly over the course of a week. Each item felt like a tiny relic from a life I barely recognized. Some of it went into drawers. Some I left in the boxes. The jewelry box stayed on my desk. I reread the letter a few times. Not searching for anything. Just sitting with it. And then one morning, I sat down at my laptop and started typing. Not the documentary script. Not another article. Something else. It began with one sentence: "I used to think being unloved made me unworthy. But now I know. Some people just don't know how to love loudly." And the words kept coming after that. The writing poured out of me over the next few months, more honest than anything I'd ever put to paper. It wasn't angry, not like my early work. And it wasn't trying to make sense of Lorraine's choices either. It was just truth. Unfiltered. Not designed for sympathy. Just clarity. I called it The Daughter Next Door. It wasn't a memoir in the traditional sense. It was structured like a narrative nonfiction book, investigative but personal. A blend of my life and the lives of dozens of women I had interviewed who had gone through the same thing, being overlooked in favor of someone more palatable, more compliant, more of what their families wanted. Hallie was in it too, though I never used her real name. I changed the details. But the dynamic was the same. The neighbor's daughter, the golden child, the one who didn't even realize she was a weapon until the damage was already done. I didn't write it to hurt anyone. I wrote it because it was time someone told the truth about this quiet kind of pain, how it eats at you for years, even after you've made it. Even after people call you successful. I pitched it to a small but respected publisher who had been following my docuseries. They said yes in a week. By the time the book came out, Invisible Daughters had been picked up for a second season, and Netflix had circled back, this time offering more creative control and a feature-length documentary on my own story. It wasn't just success. It was vindication, quiet, steady, undeniable. And here's where the satisfying part starts. See, once the book hit the shelves, people started talking. Not just readers, but local media. Podcasts. Book clubs. Reviewers. Women who had gone through the same thing started tagging their moms, their sisters, their childhood friends in posts that read, "This book broke me open." And Sandusky? Oh, they noticed. A regional news outlet did a feature on me, titled The Daughter Who Spoke First. It was bold. And it didn't hide from what Lorraine did. They ran a full photo of the house. They even dug up Lorraine's archived quote from years back, the one where she'd told a neighbor Hallie was the daughter I wish I had. It was printed in black and white for all of Northern Ohio to read. And Hallie? She emailed me the day the article dropped. I get it now. Not just the pain, but the reason behind your silence. I thought I was in the background of your story. But I wasn't. I was standing in a spotlight someone else pointed at me, and I never even asked why you were in the dark. You deserved more. From her. From me. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. For real this time. Not for appearances. Just for truth. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing closure. I had written it. Published it. Sent it out into the world where it could live on its own legs. I had taken the silence I was raised in and turned it into a platform. That's revenge, in a way. Not loud or vicious. Not vengeful in the way stories often are. But undeniable. And Lorraine's legacy? It was no longer defined by her porcelain dishes or pressed slacks or the lavender scent she always wore. It was now tied to the woman she tried to forget, me. I didn't have to curse her name. I didn't have to shame Hallie or storm into court to fight for money that would never heal anything. I didn't have to destroy anyone. All I had to do was succeed, out loud. To turn what was once my wound into a published page. And to know, deep down, that Lorraine had to watch the world celebrate the daughter she never thought was enough. That was enough for me. Now, when people ask me about my story, I don't hesitate anymore. I tell them. I say, it's a long one. But it ends well. And that's the truth. The most satisfying kind.